I decided to use the real mic today because I've always wanted to be a rapper, and this kind of helps me feel like I'm rocking the mic. My name is CHID Liberty. I am a social entrepreneur. In my late 20s, the social part of entrepreneurship was more like me drinking vodka straight out of the bottle at the club. Not exactly the definition of social entrepreneurship I think my parents were hoping for. But then in my late 20s, I came in contact with this crazy idea called the Liberian Women's Peace Movement. And my family was exiled from Liberia early on in my life. Liberia experienced decades of civil war. And I had known all of the actors, all of these amazing and sometimes crazy male actors, warlords, professors, and nobody could seem to find a solution to this war. So you can imagine being a 28-year-old young guy working in tech in the Bay Area and hearing that a bunch of women had gotten together, started grassroots organizations, prayed and protested, and ended up ending the Civil War, then started a political movement, and elected the first woman president in the history of the African continent. And I thought, wow, how is that possible? You know, my dad was a PhD from Stanford, and all of his friends were PhDs from this place and that place. How was it that these grassroots women were able to create so much change? And I decided, I don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, but definitely the first thing I need to do is get on a plane and go to Liberia and start working with these women. So I went to my first women's meeting, group meeting with one of the small organizations, and after about my third or fourth, I realized that there was a common thread with all of them, no pun intended, and that was that they all had some kind of sewing training program. So here I was coming from finance in Silicon Valley, and I was like, wait, what if I could take sort of venture capital culture and mix it with this ability to sew? And I said, guys, what if we commercialize this? Like, what if we started a very gigantic, amazing sewing factory and served US brands? And of course, they thought that was a really phenomenal idea. We ended up starting what was the first fair trade certified factory on the continent of Africa, and it was 49% owned by the women that worked there. Lucky for me, very randomly, this MTV reality star came to our factory in the first year. Very, very random story. Her dad was there. He ends up going back to LA and got us this gigantic, gigantic contract. They literally called me to come to a meeting in LA. I got there and basically walked out with a $20 million a year deal. 2 weeks later, I signed a second one with a Japanese company called Itochu. So here I was, this social entrepreneur trying to do all this good, eking out my first couple years of running this business, and then all of a sudden I kind of ran into this $40 million a year of annual money, and I thought, wow, I'm going to be really rich, and I'm going to do a lot of good. But of course, as I started to make this all happen, it was a 2.5-year process of actually building the infrastructure to fulfill these contracts. As you can see, this is one day outside of our factory, the first day that we put the call out that we were hiring people, and there was absolutely a line out the door. People had heard that you were getting these great jobs. You could become an owner of the factory. They had a savings match program, a literacy program, and we could not keep people away. So we were really excited. And then this little thing happened called Ebola. So just as we were getting started, I think our first shipment was due for October of that year. And in June, we started getting this sense that Ebola was creeping into Monrovia. We'd heard about it out in the rural areas, but we thought, you know, there's no way that we can stop now. We've been building this thing for 2.5 years. There's just nothing that's going to stop us under any conditions. So, we were cranking at about 1 million miles an hour. And then, as you know, in July, things really started to heat up. And it became clear because 3/4 of my workers lived in the slum. And in fact, the factory is pretty much in the slum that was on the cover of New York Times that needed to be quarantined. This is a picture of when they were chasing everybody back into the slum area They brought the military, they had guns. A young boy was actually shot trying to get his tea for his mother because he wasn't moving quick enough for the military. So 3/4 of our workers were going to be quarantined in this place, and it was very, very, very clear that we would at least need to shut down the factory for a few weeks. I thought, let's give it 2 weeks. The government will sort this out, and we'll come back. I'll call our customers, and in no time, things will be good. So I actually went on a quick trip to France. I figured, let's give Liberia 2 weeks, and on my 3rd day in France, they issued a government state of emergency, and essentially the entire country and our factory was shut down. So as you can imagine, my hopes of doing a whole lot of good and making a whole lot of money were not going to happen anymore. When we would talk to our customers, when we'd invite them, 2 years ago, if I'd ever invite somebody to come to Liberia to visit us, they would say, okay, great, I'm in Asia next week, I'll stop by Liberia on my way back. Now I would say Liberia to somebody and they didn't even want to shake my hand because they knew that I was there within the last couple of weeks. So we basically were in this position where we'd built this gigantic infrastructure. We'd raised millions and millions of dollars from impact and venture investors, and now we couldn't get anybody to touch us. So out of pure desperation, sitting there thinking, I have all this fabric on the ground. This is now 9 months after the Ebola outbreak had started. And there were close to no new cases. There were still some cases in the country, but you could tell that the rate was going down. I still couldn't get any big customers to come in, but I knew that we could operate. The women were, so eager to get back to work. And I thought, all right, we have all this fabric that we're not going to be able to use, but we've purchased. What can we do for Liberia right now to both help the women get back to work and do something sort of beautiful for the country? And we came up with this idea because, like in Thailand, every child, even if you go to a free public school, needs a school uniform. And so we have this empty factory, we have all of this fabric left over. What if the schools had been shut down for the last 9 months also? And what if we could help catalyze getting kids back in school by just providing them with a free school uniform? And so one day I went into the factory and I said, guys, I've tried about 1 million different things and tried to bring a million different customers here. And I said, well, what if we could just make and give away school uniforms? And the women in the factory said, boss, we love all of your ideas, they're great, but how the heck are we going to pay for giving away 100,000 school uniforms to people? And I said, I really don't know. And we sat down for a little while and we started to hash out a bunch of different ideas. Can we get a grant? Can we do this? And then we said, no, we're a business and we think we can hold our own as a business. Why don't we start our own clothing line for the first time? And every time we sell something, we'll give away a school uniform. So that's the idea that we ended up going with. We launched last June an amazing new brand on Kickstarter called Uniform. I know some people in the room have gotten their uniform t-shirts. You're awesome. And our goal was to pre-sell 50,000 t-shirts in $50,000 worth in t-shirts in 45 days. We sold $50,000 worth of t-shirts in 5 hours, in the first 5 hours of the campaign. Did $230,000 altogether, helped to put 8,000 children in school, and get our 300 moms back to work, which was pretty cool. Most famously, we got the shirt on Shaquille O'Neal. This is me and Shaq, who makes me look like a baby. And yeah, just had a really, really amazing time with the campaign. And yeah, I can't say enough about it. Just totally successful. So people always ask me, listen, man, even my board members, even my investors, I kind of say, CHID, you were kind of in the middle of the most unexpected situation ever. Nobody could have predicted that there would be an Ebola outbreak in Liberia, of all places. Why didn't you just give up? And my mind always goes to this graph. Like all of the people in my factory, all the people in Liberia, my life was torn apart by the Liberian Civil War also. And that top graph, sorry if you can't see it too well, but it basically shows you GDP growth sort of after the war. And GDP grew pretty pretty well, pretty significantly. But the per capita GDP, the amount of money that each person was taking home, actually never got back to the levels it was before the war. And so, for me, it was so clear that we needed to be back home and back investing in Liberia under any circumstances, that as long as this remained the picture, that we were at risk of going back to war. And more personally, this is a picture of some of the women leaving the factory, and more personally for me, there was always this story in my mind. It's a story of a woman, Rebecca, which is the woman in the door. Rebecca, as you can see, wore a headscarf. At this point, she was known as Mariama. She wore a headscarf. She was Muslim. She prayed with the Muslim women every day. And one day, one of the funniest things about our factory is after about the first year, about a third of the women got divorces. And I was like, you know, every day I'd come in and there was like a new divorce happening, and I just went with it. So one day Rebecca comes in, she comes into my office and she says, you know, CHID, I need to change the name on my bank account. And I said, okay, great. I said, is this another divorce by chance? And she says, yes, it is. And I said, okay, great. So what are we changing your last name to? And she says, no. We have to change my first and my last name. At this point, I was calling her Mariama. So I looked at her puzzled. Why do we have to change your first and last name? I don't get it. She says, you know, when I was 13 years old, I was effectively sold into a marriage to a man who was 40 years older than me. And I was forced to assume his religion. I'm actually Christian, and my name is Rebecca. And that moment that you stand in front of somebody, this woman's actually older than I am, and you see her reclaim her childhood identity in front of you, makes it so clear why the risk of investing in places like Liberia is so less risky than not investing in Liberia for Rebecca. So that's it. Thank you.